Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar hosted by Rails-to-Trails Conservancy's policy team. My name is Isabel Lord. I'm the advocacy coordinator here at RTC, and I will be your moderator for this session. Our topic for today is how to make your Safe Streets and Roads for All application successful. The Safe Streets and Roads for All program is a federal discretionary grant program that was introduced under the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law in 2021 and will provide $5 billion between 2022 to 2026 to support regional, local, and tribal initiatives aimed at preventing serious injuries and fatalities that occur on our nation's roadways. The Safe Streets and Roads for All program provides funding for two types of grants: planning and demonstration grants, which provide federal funds to develop, complete, or supplement a comprehensive safety action plan, and implementation grants, which provide federal funds to implement projects and strategies identified in an action plan to address a roadway safety problem. It is important to note that you must have an action plan. It is important to note that this program requires an eligible action plan to be in place before applying to implement projects and strategies. The upcoming application deadline for the second cycle of funding is July 10th, 5 p.m. Eastern. Today, you will hear from three panelists who successfully navigated the application progress and secured implementation grants for their localities. They will provide insights into how to approach the upcoming application process as well as future cycles. They will also share how they are using active transportation connectivity in their plans to improve safety. Before I introduce our panelists, I wanted to take a moment to go through some brief housekeeping. First, as you probably already noticed, attendees have been automatically muted as they join to keep background noise at a minimum. You will not be able to speak during today's webinar. We'll be keeping an eye out for any tech issues that may emerge on our end, but we will be unable to help with individual tech issues. If you experience any such problem, your best course of action is to contact Zoom's free customer support directly or view a selection of help topics at the link shown on the screen. I encourage you to copy those down now before we move on from this slide. If for whatever reason you lose the webinar connection, please re-click your login link. You'll be able to rejoin the ongoing session at any time. We are recording this webinar, so worst case scenario, you'll always be able to view it later. We'll save time for questions at the end. If you have any questions about our resources or other content you'll hear about in today's presentation, please type them in the question box on the right-hand side of your screen at any time. If you have specific or more detailed technical assistance questions, please email us via the link on our screen and we'll get back to you as soon as possible. Finally, after today's webinar, you'll receive a follow-up email containing a quick survey about today's webinar, a link to sign up for occasional email notices from us, and most importantly, a recording of today's webinar. With that, it is my pleasure to introduce Betty Smoot-Madison, Aaron Wilson, and Will White. Betty Smoot-Madison joins us from Atlanta, Georgia, where she serves as the Director of Mobility Planning for the City of Atlanta's Department of Transportation. Aaron Wilson joins us from Missoula, Montana, where he serves as the Planning Manager for the City of Missoula's Public Works and Mobility Department. Will White joins us from Salisbury, Maryland, where he serves as the Transportation Project Specialist for the City of Salisbury's Department of Infrastructure and Development. Last but not least, we are joined by RTC's very own Kim Chesser, who I will introduce later in the session. I will now hand it over to Betty Smoot-Madison to learn more about Atlanta's successful application.
All right. Well, thank you, Isabel, and thanks to the Rails-to-Trails team for inviting Atlanta to this important discussion, a very timely discussion, as many of us are preparing submissions for the 2023 round of Safe Streets for All. So I really appreciate that we have this opportunity to have this discussion. I am the face for today, but I represent a larger team of planners, engineers, and data analysts that really helped pull our successful application together. So hopefully I will represent our team really well. Next slide. So I always like to sort of paint a full picture. So my first few slides are really about ATL-DOT's goals and how this project aligns with those goals. And then I'll dive into the project specifics. So the One Atlanta Strategic Transportation Plan, which is what I like to call ATL-DOT's blueprint for success, established our vision Vision Zero goal of reducing crashes and ultimately saving lives by eliminating severe and fatal crashes. We are actively developing our first official Vision Zero action plan now, and that will be complete in October of this year. So you can learn more about those efforts at atlvisionzero.com, and I believe the link has been dropped in the chat. Also, we advance our Vision Zero goals by taking every opportunity to make Atlanta's streets safer, such as by incorporating safety interventions, not just into our major capital projects, but also into maintenance projects, such as resurfacing and restriping, and overall just really being strategic about where interventions are being placed. And then lastly, our goals are to make our streets safer for all users, but especially the most vulnerable users. So that's your pedestrians, bicyclists, transit riders, and other micromobility users. Those are the users of our streets who are most susceptible to life-altering and adverse consequences, such as serious injury or death if involved in a crash. So that's really why we are safety-driven and Vision Zero focused. Next slide. So just last year, Atlanta voters approved a $750 million T-SPLOST and bond referenda that we call the Moving Atlanta Forward Infrastructure Package. Of that $750 million, $450 million of that is dedicated to transportation improvements, which will allow us to advance over 90 million of that is going towards safer streets improvements. 112 million of that is in sidewalk improvements, so new installations, repairs, and curb ramps, and then other investments in roads, bridges, trails, traffic calming, and improving transit experience. Next slide. So one of the approved projects in that Moving Atlanta Forward investment package is a little over $10 million for our Central Avenue and Pryor Street safe streets. So even before the federal investment, this was a project that was funded for improvements along these corridors. One of our strategies for going after federal funds has been to align with projects that we are already planning investment for over the next 5 years through that Moving Atlanta Forward package, and really utilizing federal money to really enhance those projects and make them even better than what we originally intended. So this, the background picture that you see here is of Central Avenue, but could probably represent either of the corridors because both of them today have a similar look and feel. They have numerous lanes for cars, even, you know, during COVID and post-COVID volumes are pretty insignificant with the exception of, you know, the couple of hours of peak weekday travel times. But in most parts of the day, it looks very much like the picture that you see here. And in many parts of the corridors, the pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure is either very basic, it's not in the greatest condition, and just overall not a pleasant experience, or non-existent altogether. So you can see there are no existing bike facilities on this corridor. Next slide. So you can imagine our excitement when we found out that Atlanta was selected to receive a $30 million implementation grant through Safe Streets for All. And so with these funds, we are now able to create a project that I like to term as what really is going to be best in class. And we can enhance the vulnerable user experience along these key downtown corridors. So in this picture here, you'll see Senator John Ossoff, along with our mayor and other city leadership announcing the award. Next slide. Okay, so now I'll kind of get into the specifics of the project itself. So Pryor and Central are one-way pairs that run north and south through the heart of Atlanta's downtown, connecting communities south of downtown to government centers. So we have city government offices, county and state government offices that are all located on or within walking distance of both or one of these corridors. There's multiple rail stations. We've got about 3 rail stations that are directly along the corridors and within walking distance of the corridors. And we also have Georgia State University, parks, and a host of other downtown destinations. And along with the transit stations, we also have a future BRT project that's being managed by our transit operator, MARTA, that is slated to start construction this summer. Both corridors have range anywhere, depending on the segment, from 3 to 5 travel lanes and on-street parking in some segments. And from 2017 to 2021, there were over 1,800 reported crashes throughout the project limits, and about 3% of those involved a pedestrian or bicyclist. So of course, improving safety along the corridor is a major driver for this project. The project includes about 27 intersections altogether between both corridors, and with concentrations of crashes and serious injuries around more than half of them. The core intent will be to add protected bike facilities and safe pedestrian facilities and crossings throughout the corridor. We still have some studies to conduct to determine the exact alignment, but you can see the dashed line at the bottom. That's where the existing Atlanta bike Beltline connection is. So we are connecting the Atlanta Beltline to a lot of those downtown destinations and communities and destinations north of the city. And again, like I was saying, we still have some more studies to conduct to determine what the exact alignment will be. There's a potential diversion from off of Central and Pryor, and there's a couple of options to how we connect to the Beltline. But definitely looking at improved lighting, safety improvements using proven countermeasures at intersections, mid-block crossings, and much more. And then the vast majority of this project is within 2 to 3 census tracts that are identified as historically disadvantaged communities and have high percentages of racial or ethnic minorities and have upwards of 40 to 65% low-income residents, and other factors that I think really help qualify us for these funds. Next slide. So just to hit on a few key considerations that I think helped make our application successful. So first, one of the requirements of the implementation grant is that there is a completed comprehensive action plan. And so the city has an adopted transportation plan, which also had a safer streets component. And between those deliverables, our plan had met sort of the minimum requirements to be considered as an action plan. But as I mentioned before, our Vision Zero action plan is under development now and will be completed in October. Also, the Pryor and Central corridors were called out as projects in that Atlanta transportation plan. So that was also, I believe, a saving grace. Second, there's a number of eligible implementation grant activities. And so while the ones listed here are not all of the eligible activities, but these are some of the most applicable for our application. So transforming a roadway corridor on a high injury network, or HIN. Both of the corridors, Central and Pryor, are both on our HIN. Installing pedestrian safety enhancements. So as I mentioned before, we have many land uses all throughout those corridors that generate lots of pedestrian and bicycle activity. And so we are looking to prioritize safety for those modes throughout the project. Supporting the development of bikeway networks. So these projects are expanding our existing bike network in addition to a recent downtown resurfacing project that is actually nearing completion, construction completion now, where we are essentially incorporating bike facilities on 5 of the 7 streets that we are resurfacing as a part of that project. So these 2 corridors will really help boost the expansion of our bike network. And then carrying out speed management strategies. So as a part of our Vision Zero work, speed management has been at the center and will be a goal for this project as well. So creating safer speeds through various traffic and proven countermeasures and interventions, including signal timing designs. And then lastly, evaluating and improving the safety of intersections. So we will concentrate a number of interventions around those key intersections along the corridor where we saw the greatest concentration of crashes, and particularly serious injury and fatal crashes. Next slide. And so just very briefly, because I feel like I covered a good bit of this in the previous slide, but I just wanted to reiterate some brief elements that I think will help strengthen your applications. Now, I will add that I wish I was a fly on the wall during USDOT scoring conversations, but since I wasn't, I can only assume that these were some of their talking points. But I think if you prioritize safety in your project, or even use safety data to determine what project you go after, you can really have a compelling story. And of course, addressing multimodal safety and emphasis on your vulnerable users is always a great strategy, and I think would help with the scoring on your applications. Equity, addressing existing barriers and access, especially for communities that have historically been disenfranchised. So really asking, how does your particular project help mitigate or remove some of those barriers? And then particularly for implementation grants, I think demonstrating an ability to effectively manage, those federal funds and federal funded projects. And so for implementation grants, you have 5 years to deliver these projects. And so I think showing that you can do that either through history of, managing similar projects of similar size, scope, and funding sources can really help. And then lastly, I always kind of talk with my leadership team about, bringing a little more to the table than the 20% minimum. I believe that also can help strengthen your application as it truly shows that you are committed to that project. For this one, our match was 25% of the project instead of the 80-20. We brought 25, and I think there's been others where that local match has been much higher for us. So I believe that really does help. Next slide. And so just a quick summary of the timeline. Our first steps will be to initiate and execute the grant agreement with USDOT. So we're working through that now. And so we anticipate that will move pretty quickly. And as a part of our TSPOS and bond program, we were already anticipating a 2023 project activation and starting planning and concept development this year. So that was when we were planning to be able to use an on-call for our general engineering services contract, but utilizing federal funds, we will have to go out and do the competitive bid. So that will take a little bit more time, but hopefully we can still kick off planning for this project very soon, before the end of summer. And then finally, skipping ahead, we do anticipate construction in 2028. The requirements of the grant is to be able to deliver the project in 5 years, as I mentioned. So we have absolutely no time to waste. Next slide, and I think that might be it. Okay, and this is just some of our social media that you can follow if you have interest in the project. We'll be posting a lot of information on our social media sites, and yeah, you can find info there. Thank you.
Perfect, Betty. Thank you so much. It's really wonderful to see the economic and social benefits of connecting the Beltline to downtown Atlanta. Establishing connectivity within active transportation and trail networks is a huge priority for Rails-to-Trails, and I love to see Atlanta continuing to build out its existing networks to benefit the larger community. With that, I will now hand it over to Aaron Wilson for his presentation on Missoula.
Hi, thanks, Isabel, and good afternoon, everybody. Hopefully you can hear me okay. Yeah, I would just reiterate Betty's thanks for having us, and just say that I find a lot of value in these webinars, and having participated in a few on the Safe Streets for All program, and I feel like I always learn more information than I present, which is valuable to me. So hopefully this is valuable to other folks as well. So yeah, I'm from Missoula, Montana, and we received a Safe Streets and Roads for All implementation grant in the 2022 round. It's about $10 million, so quite a bit smaller than a lot of the other implementation awards, but we'll do some really good work in Missoula to help connect our non-motorized corridors, and hoping to walk through just sort of what we've done in Missoula and how we put our application together, and hope that's useful for others as they consider what applications they're doing. And maybe just a couple of quick fun facts about Missoula on the non-motorized front. And it's kind of, I always love doing these presentations for folks who are really interested in trails and non-motorized, but I don't know if a lot of people know that Missoula was the location of, I believe, the US military's first and only bicycle transported military unit. It was in the late 1800s, and I believe their major success was biking from Missoula to Kansas. I don't know that they were ever deployed on bicycles, but it's sort of highlights the non-motorized history in Missoula going back over 100 years. We were also the headquarters for the 1976 Bike Centennial, which was a bike ride about a little over 4,000 miles across the country. It came through Missoula, and it established, I think, Missoula as a hub for adventure biking, and particularly work that around trails and those cross-country routes and commuting by bike or traveling by bike between communities. So Missoula has a long history in this, and so it sometimes feels easy for us to put these projects together, but there's still a lot of work. So next slide. Good. So I want to just quickly go over in this presentation, talk a little bit about the context in Missoula and some of our planning background, because I think that's really helpful for thinking through sort of how we got to our project and identified what we were submitting and told the story of what this project is and how it fits into the broader picture. And then get into some of the ways that we tried to use data and other ways to tell the story of our project. So it's not just, here's a safety issue, we need some money, we want to fix it, but what makes this a really compelling project, and why are we focused on this particular intervention or improvement at this time? And then we have obviously our solutions that we try to put into the grant to make it compelling and really focus on active transportation, because the Missoula, all of our plans have active transportation elements. We're really focused on that, and it's a key part of our planning strategy here in Missoula. So next slide. So here in Missoula, we have done a lot of planning. We are a fairly planning-friendly community, which sometimes is good and bad, but in the case of these grants, tends to really help us both identify the projects and make sure that we have really competitive projects as we're moving forward. So similar to Atlanta, Missoula is a Vision Zero community. Our city council just recently adopted a Vision Zero policy, and our metropolitan planning organization adopted a towards Vision Zero in our safety plan about in 2013. So we've had that for a little over 10 years now. And so we've been really focused on safety in all of our planning documents. We also try to make sure we're using data and prioritizing our projects based on things like safety and equity. So in our long range plans, we have a real focus on those two measures. Our city council uses those to prioritize our capital improvement projects. And so we know all of our highest ranked, the projects that we want to get to construct in the near future are hopefully going to hit those marks as we move forward. So next slide. So on the safety front, again, we've done a lot of data analysis. As I mentioned, we have a Vision Zero policy in place. We've had a safety plan in place for about 10 years. And so we have done a lot of work just evaluating crashes across the community. And what that helps us do is tell the story about, what are the issues we're seeing on safety in Missoula, and what does that mean for the types of projects we need to construct. So what we find is that, like a lot of communities, most crashes are at the intersections. So we tend to be very intersection focused in our improvements and making sure that we're treating those in the right way. We also know that non-motorized users are particularly vulnerable, and we have that data that what this chart shows is that non-motorists are towards the bottom in terms of the number of total crashes they're involved in or that we see, but they have a really disproportionate number of severe and fatal crashes. So not that likely to get in a bike or ped crash, but if you do, that's going to be very severe, and we want to really design around that to make sure that those users are safe and can comfortably and safely use our transportation system. We also know, and this is sort of relevant to the project that we're developing, is that young drivers are also disproportionately represented in our crash data. And so that means around our schools and other places where we might see a lot of young drivers, that we need to pay particular attention to how we're designing projects and making sure that they're safe, and that students are safe as they're getting to school on a day-to-day basis. So a lot of background safety data that helps us start to craft, like, what is the story that we're seeing in Missoula? And as we put a project together, how can we use that data to tell that story? Next slide. And then we also have done a lot of infrastructure plans. So looking specifically at different types of mobility and what kinds of infrastructure do we need. So this map is from our pedestrian safety or pedestrian facilities master plan, where we looked at, what's the state of our pedestrian network, where are areas that we might want to focus on. And we pull in a lot of other data besides just pedestrian specific information. So we're looking at equity, we're looking at concentrations of particular kinds of destinations like schools or medical clinics or assisted living, areas that might see a lot of or generate a lot of pedestrian activity. And we use that to identify areas where we will want to focus projects, knowing that there's going to be a high benefit and payout in terms of the benefits to our community from those projects. So again, all of these things leading up to informing what projects we might put forward for a Safe Streets grant application. Next slide. So on the specific project we put together, we started by trying to define the problem. And so this project, and my next slide will go into a little bit more detail on the context, but it's along a corridor in Missoula called South Avenue. We started looking at crash data around Missoula and identified, just looking at, like, what are the crashes here, and is it actually going to be a viable project in terms of meeting the criteria to have a real safety benefit for our community. And so we can start mapping out where are the crashes happening, what types of crashes are we seeing, do we have fatalities, if any, and pulling out those non-motorized crashes like bicycle and pedestrian as specific users that we want to pay particular attention to, given the potential severity of crashes if they're involved. So we start with this kind of base level of data of evaluating, is this actually a good project, and is this going to give us a compelling application? Next slide. We also want to use some qualitative data as we identify these projects. So we looked at trying to define the problem beyond just there's a lot of crashes here. So we can use a lot of qualitative data, and some of that comes from crash reports. So this quote here is directly from one of the crash reports that resulted in a fatality, and it really highlights the issues on this corridor, that this particular individual was forced into the roadway because of snow buildup. There's no sidewalks in this location. There's nowhere really for pedestrians to be. There's poor lighting, and that crash happened at night and resulted in that pedestrian being killed. So some real potential here to make improvements. We also looked at the full context of the corridor to see kind of what that full story is. So looking at transit access, this project is on a transit route. Currently, the bus just sort of, as that picture shows, kind of dumps you off on the side of the road in a bus stop. So it's not accessible. It doesn't feel safe to wait there for the bus, particularly in the winter when you're thinking about, it gets dark at 4:30 or 4:45 in Missoula in the winter. So that's right when people are commuting to and going home from work and having to wait in the dark. We also have a trail component here that travels along the length of the corridor. There's some existing trail, as you can see in this photo, but it's really kind of substandard. It's right next to the side of the road. There's not a lot of separation between vehicles and the users. There's really not even a curb there. So it's not very comfortable. It doesn't feel particularly safe. And we can make a lot of improvements to connect that project to this trail and trails on either side of the project. The other context that we were, in sort of the qualitative data that we had to help tell the story of this project that I think was really important was looking at all the other uses. So we have two or three schools, two schools directly on the corridor, one a block off. So it's really safe routes to school. Routes for a lot of students. We recently had a major investment in a regional park that was about a $35 million investment by the city. And so we're seeing a lot more people travel out there for soccer games or youth tournaments or softball, and wanting to make sure that connection is safe for everyone getting out there, regardless of how they're traveling. We also have a major medical facility and a bunch of assisted living that just sort of brings a lot of additional people there. So all of that context helped us set the stage for this project. So next slide. So as we started to identify the solutions that we wanted to include in this, we started with all that data we collected, what are the crashes telling us, and then tried to apply just really basic analysis, like what are the proven safety countermeasures that we can apply to this corridor and the crashes we're seeing. So really basic identifying safe pedestrian crossings and identifying the crash reduction rate, and does that actually help address the safety issues? So where do we see those pedestrian crashes? What kind of improvement can we make to make that safe, so that we're drawing a direct connection between the safety data and the conditions that are out there and the improvements that we're trying to make. So it's really clear for anyone reviewing this what those benefits will be. And that it also helps us identify our project readiness and the design. So making sure we have those designs identified up front and we can move through the grant process as quickly as possible, knowing that we only have 5 years to get to construction. So next slide. So just some examples of things that we included. We really focused on those intersections, knowing that that's where a lot of crashes happen. So making sure we have good, visible, high visibility pedestrian crossings, pairing those with RRFBs at the school locations and at the bus stops where we have a lot of potential crossing of pedestrians. We also looked at that shared use path and bike facilities along the entire corridor. So this is connecting sort of one of our major urban transportation corridors out through a more rural part of Missoula. And so it is sort of an urban to rural connection, and there's a lot of transitions. So making sure that we do those in a way that's safe and highly visible. So it's a very, very much an active transportation project with making connections on that shared use path, the bike lanes, crossings, and safe routes to school. So next slide. And then finally, just to kind of wrap up my piece here, that all of the data and our hard data and the design and tying all those things together is really important. But we also know that in Missoula, the equity and engagement process is also very important. So this is a joint city-county project, and so it's helping to foster relationships between the city and the county and our school district to make sure that we're not just dropping projects at one jurisdictional boundary. And I would encourage everyone to think about these grants as opportunities to go beyond just your jurisdictional boundaries and create complete corridors, because the traveling public doesn't care if the city limit stops at one point. They just want to get from A to B and do it safely. We also have done a lot of public engagement, and we try to track that and try not to avoid those community discussions and build support for these projects through that project development. And then that helps you sort of refine the story in your grant applications. And we also try to track our complaints and requests that we get from citizens, because that helps us inform where we have trouble spots, where maybe the crash data shows that, but maybe it doesn't. And when we hear from the actual residents who are living or using those corridors, it really helps us refine the data. To answer, just to kind of wrap up, to answer one of the questions that I saw in the chat just before I started talking about whether rural areas are at a disadvantage, I think, this is a good example of a project that, yes, Missoula has some very urban areas, but this project is really trying to connect those urban and rural areas. So parts of this project are suburban at best, and connecting out to some of our rural locations. And it is a joint city-county project. And so I think you can be really competitive as long as you have that clear connection between safety data and the improvements you're trying to make, and a story on why is that particular project important and why do it now. So I think, we've had a lot of success on that approach, and I would encourage others to, submit whether you think you would have a shot or not, because you don't always know. And I think these programs have a lot of funding and there's a lot of opportunity. So with that, I think I will wrap up and go to the next slide. If anyone ever has questions about this project, feel free to reach out, or you can go to our website, which is the MissoulaMPO.com. There's a lot of info on our planning efforts and projects that we're working on. So thanks everyone for having me, and look forward to some questions.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Aaron, for sharing Missoula's project story and how it incorporates active transportation. I really love how Missoula's application process combines a data-driven approach with a strong community engagement aspect. I think you all did a great job of that. And with that, I will now hand it over to Will White for his presentation on Salisbury. Will, take it away.
Yep. Hey, I'm Will White, Transportation Manager for Salisbury, Maryland. Big thank you to both the coalition and everyone here for having me. Salisbury is a small municipality, smallish. We're about 33,000 people, but the urban area is about 100,000, 150,000 in a very rural area. So similar to Missoula, but smaller. What you see there on the top left is kind of Salisbury. You see how rural it gets very quickly in that Photoshop. Next slide. Little bit of background on the Vision Zero program. Mission to end traffic fatalities, serious injuries by January 1, 2030. And essentially the whole timeline's based around that and hitting that goal. We started our original discussion in 2018 and kicked off a bunch of interdepartmental coordination throughout that. And that included talking with Maryland State Highway Administration and Salisbury University as well, which also controls some streets in the city. Gathered data, put the plan together, and actually adopted the plan on the first virtual city council session when COVID kicked off in March 2020. And we've been going strong ever since. We are required by our plan and by the resolution that established Vision Zero city policy to submit an annual report every year, which keeps us on track and keeps us accountable to everyone. That has to happen by July 1 each year. And we've submitted 2 of them. We're about to submit our 3rd in about 2 weeks. So next slide, please. The projects are heavily in pedestrian and bike focused, i.e. those vulnerable road users. Much like you heard from some previous presenters, I believe it was Aaron. Intersections are a big take. And that's kind of natural everywhere. So a lot of mini and compact roundabouts are focused are the focus of the plan, in addition to road diets and lane width diets and on some of our very large streets. Salisbury is both blessed and cursed with very large streets, which gives us a problem, however, provides us plenty of space to correct it with bike infrastructure and sidewalk widening. In the short term, we rely a lot on those quick build strategies, but in the long term, in the mid to long term, we do have a lot of trails planned, and we've already started constructing some of those. In fact, some of our signature cycle tracks, including the ones that are in our grant application for Safe Streets for All, are key parts of that trail network. Next slide, please. All right. So what that means for you guys and getting, pursuing your own plan or your own grant funding. First, have a viable detailed plan. What I'm hearing, and some of this is hearsay with other municipalities around the state of Maryland, but in working with them in our sensing sessions, is other municipalities that applied for funding but didn't get it, kind of just threw out a, hey, we're going to use this money for citywide safety, and didn't flesh that out. So USDOT deprioritized their applications. Our application is also based around multiple interventions or dozens of interventions across the entire city. But what we did is create a matrix, which is in our plan, which is posted on our website, which they just put up the link to in the chat box, that shows what we're doing on each street. So while we didn't have necessarily plan sets to submit to USDOT, we told them what we wanted to do and where, and they were very happy about that, as opposed to some others that struggled to relay what they wanted to achieve. On the next page, when we get there, you'll show where we use data to prove that need, and we were able to back up what we were doing on each street with data at each street. Excuse me. Go for what's in reach, right? So if you don't have an action plan that meets the requirements, don't try for implementation grants. That was what some other municipalities in the state also tried. They tried to stretch that, what they had to justify it as an action plan, and it just didn't fly. So reaching too far will essentially waste your year in the application cycle, because you have to go back, wait another year, get your planning money and reset. So if you don't meet that self-certification, don't try to get implementation grants. Go straight for the planning or demonstration grants. That said, if you meet that category, hey, be ambitious about what you are asking for, because we probably could have gotten more funding than we actually did, but we were intentionally trying to moderate ourselves, and that was something we kind of regretted later on. Don't be afraid to combine projects, or vice versa, break projects off to meet your funding limitations and what you can come up with matches for. So like I said, our project is actually about 120 projects put together across the entire city. Small ones that would not of themselves have met the minimum funding requirement, but together they add up into something that does. Equity is a big one. It's probably their major, it's one of, if not their most important deciding factor, in addition to the safety benefits on these applications. So again, speaking to other municipalities where they were falling short in a lot of cases was in equity metrics and being able to justify where they were trying to spend the money. Salisbury doesn't have a large area where we're in a large historically disadvantaged community that we're trying to spend the money in. However, the entire city essentially meets one of the categories that would make us an area of persistent poverty. So that came into account, and that was actually something that USDOT remarked on. Next slide, please. So being able to show with data what you're trying to do and where matters. So these are taken directly out of our Vision Zero action plan. The picture on the left is our high injury network overlaid with the HUD CDBG target areas, so the community development block grant target areas, i.e. our low to moderate income neighborhoods. And you can see that essentially the entire high injury network falls in these low to moderate income neighborhoods. Again, a major factor that we were able to rely on to back up our application. The picture on the right, same concept, but it's the intersections. All of these intersections are listed in our plan, and we show exactly what we're going to do based on the data. The big one was speed management, in addition to creating or separating the vulnerable road users, either or both. Like one of the things that we have in the data is that only 2% of our streets actually see fatal crashes regularly. So we were able to narrow down strategies for those. Nearly 50% of the serious injury crashes are occurring on less than 7% of our streets. And of those 7% of streets all essentially look the same. So we were able to take that and say, hey, here's our streets that we know we have an issue. By the way, here are streets that aren't having a crash data, but they are essentially the same design. And for whatever reason, they're not seeing a crash, but we're going to be proactive about it. And we listed those out as well. All of those got funded for improvements. All right, next slide, please. All right, last tip, because this has come up post application as we've started to work through the grant. USDOT, this is the first time that they've really given money directly, at least outside the RAISE program, to municipalities. So they're very big on risk management right now, financial risk management. So know where your match is coming from and be able to back it up. Have people manage your projects who are a dedicated project manager who has a lot of experience in transportation or preferably both. A lot of experience dealing with federal funding. This is actually slightly different. They're using a different procurement mechanism than they normally do. They're using 2 CFR 200, which is actually similar to what HUD uses. So having that kind of mechanism built in and be able to show that experience will help you. So, and make sure you play that up in your application. And again, be able to cite directly where your match will originate from. We went in at 80-20, so we're giving 20% match, but we were able to say, hey, it's coming from this line item, these numbers and these accounts, it's earmarked for this. And that was something they seized on as well. Next slide. All right, thank you. So if you guys need anything, I'm always available. My email is right there. I do respond. It might take me a day or two, but I will respond. And then our Vision Zero website is right there at the bottom. We do have both the application and Vision Zero action plan and all the annual reports there. So please feel free to reach out there and, take a look.
Perfect. Will, thank you so much for walking us through Salisbury's application and project development process. I love to see Salisbury prioritizing a Vision Zero approach in their planning. It's really great. And thank you to all three of our panelists for sharing their insights into the application process overall. I am now thrilled to introduce RTC's new staff member, Kim Chesser, who serves as our state agency advocacy specialist. Most recently, Kim served as the director of the Delaware Office of Highway Safety, where she was responsible for planning, organizing, and directing operations and programs in accordance with federal and state rules, regulations, and guidelines. Kim, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you, Isabel. It's great to be here, and I'm glad to have an opportunity to talk about this topic. So vulnerable road users such as pedestrians, cyclists, and people who use wheelchairs accounted for approximately 20% of the 42,915 people who were killed in motor vehicle crashes in 2021, according to the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. This is an increase of 13% over 2020, and it disproportionately impacts communities of color. This tragic trend of vulnerable user fatalities rising significantly in recent years, both in numbers and percentage of all highway fatalities, cannot continue. Preliminary NHTSA data for 2022 suggests an almost 3% decrease in pedestrian fatalities. So this is promising, but more work needs to be done, and investing in connected walking and biking infrastructure separated from vehicle traffic is a critical strategy for eliminating this unacceptable trend we're seeing across the country. In the first round of funding, many applicants included traffic-separated routes to walk and bike and connectivity as important strategies in their applications. So given that 46% of the implementation grants included an element of traffic separation, it appears that USDOT is rewarding applicants for recognizing and implementing these elements. The Safe Streets and Roads for All grant program is a direct action of the USDOT's National Roadway Safety Strategy and supports the Safe System Approach and Vision Zero strategies. These Safe Streets and Roads for All awards are encouraging as they signal a deeper understanding that how we invest in walking and biking infrastructure makes a significant difference for the safety of our communities. Another example of new and significant changes as a result of the bipartisan infrastructure law is to the Highway Safety Improvement Program, which includes increased overall funding, as well as new reform for biking and pedestrian safety. This new policy mandates that certain states are now required to spend 15% or more of their Highway Safety Improvement Program funds to address safety improvements for vulnerable road users if 15% or more of the state's annual crash fatalities are biking and or pedestrian fatalities. This change will impact 31 states and could account for hundreds of millions of dollars of HSIP funding dedicated to pedestrian and bicycle safety improvements. States that are not mandated can still spend funds on safety projects for pedestrian and bicyclists, but they're not required to do so. So to wrap it up, I just want to say the bipartisan infrastructure law made some significant changes and provided some new opportunities. It's exciting to hear from our panelists today about their successful projects. This new trend is setting a precedent for future Safe Streets and Roads for All funding cycles, as well as other safety-focused programs, such as the HSIP, by highlighting that trails and other safe walking and biking facilities are crucial parts of the solution to increasing safety on our nation's roadways.
So our first question is, often there are fewer pedestrian bicycle crashes along a corridor because the area is so unsafe no one wants to walk or bicycle. Can a systemic safety approach, i.e., this is where crashes would be happening if people felt safe there, be used as part of the application? And any of our panelists can jump in with their answer. Happy to repeat the question as well if needed.
I'll take that one. Yes, because we did it. And the easiest way to do it is, or the way we justified it was look at all the streets where you do have crashes happening. And look at the ones that are similar to it. So that was our justification in play on a lot of things. For example, Eastern Shore Drive had a lot of crashes. Carroll looks exactly the same, but for some reason didn't. So we're treating both. The other play is, hey, use your context to your advantage. So streets near the university in Salisbury got prioritized, specifically those that were along that gap of a mile between downtown and the university, just because it has most of the issues. So yes, you can, you just have to be able to justify it.
Yeah, and I would, I'll emphasize what Will was saying, because I think identifying, any common risk factors based on the history of other crashes that are happening on the system. I think for us, there are common factors in a lot of our crashes, such as, certain land uses. So it could be transit stops, mixed use development, schools, and, institutions, hospitals, those types of traffic generators are can often be seen as risk factors in crashes. So I think utilizing that data, even if you're not really seeing it on a particular corridor, if you're seeing it throughout your system, then I would say you could definitely use that data. And then maybe also consider if you are able to collect near miss data. I think that's something that a lot of cities are starting to tap into. So if you have the ability pretty quickly to do some near miss analysis, then that might work too.
Perfect. Thank you all so much for sharing. And on to the next question. How much of this data came from a Safe Streets and Roads for All action plan versus how much of this did you have before applying? And then kind of question along with that is, how is the safety data gathered, and are there ways to ask for more specific data, or does any extra data need to be gathered on the ground?
I can maybe start to answer that. That we had a lot of the data that we had came from previous work that we did. So initially it comes from, we get crash data from our state DOT. They provide that detailed crash data, and we can look through it, look for trends and other data. And sometimes you can identify specific issues that maybe you need to collect more data from on a study. And that could come from a consultant or an action plan or some other location. So I'd say for folks who are getting started on their action plan, make sure you get a good data set along with that you can use and continue to update. That's been really helpful for us. We update that every year with info from our state DOT, and then supplement it with data, collecting speeds or other, looking at specific police reports if we want to dive into those, get the more qualitative data from a crash. But I think state DOTs are a really good source potentially, or at least they are in Montana. And I know there are a lot of other resources that are getting developed right now to get you that data. And I would say just anything you can get your hands on is a good place to start.
Yeah, for Atlanta, we utilize very similarly, we utilize our state DOT's crash data system called Numetrics, and we run analysis in that platform. In our application, we mostly use the 5-year crash data with emphasis on vulnerable user data and fatal and severe injury data. And then we also explain that some of the crash types that we were seeing along the corridor, just to generally show what types of proven countermeasures that we would be exploring as a part of the project. And then there are also other platforms that we use for like speed and volume data, such as Streetlight Insight.
Check with your state too. Some states offer, every state will give you crash data, state DOT, but Maryland, for example, has a partnership with Washington College that actually visualizes that in GIS format and pushes it out. Your state may or may not do something similar. If it does, or if you're in Maryland, reach out to them. So that our actual first Vision Zero data dump came entirely from that source. Since then, we've gotten better. We now pull in stuff from our NPD and things like that. That's even better and more recent. Just be aware you're gonna have to clean that up, because you're gonna get everything from serious crash on the highway to someone backed into someone else in a parking lot when you do that. So just know that that's going to be more time consuming, but more recent.
Perfect. All those are great responses and great unique insights. I think we have time for one more question, and that would be, What type of disadvantaged populations did each city have? How do these projects impact these communities?
So specifically for Atlanta, the majority of the project is within about 2 to 3 different census tracts that are identified as historically disadvantaged communities based on race and income. So I believe, you know, having your project serve underserved communities is one of the requirements in the Safe Streets for All. They do have a couple of tools that's listed within the NOFO that you can use. There's one that's called an Equitable Transportation Community Explorer. And then they also have a climate and economic justice screening tool that you could use to help identify if your communities are within those areas. But you will have to show that a portion of the funds are being spent in those areas.
Yeah, just reiterate that there's a lot of good tools out there to evaluate projects based on just what the DOT is going to be using to assess where you have historically disadvantaged populations. We also tried to supplement our grant with just other data that we had around. So we have partnerships with our health department that's doing a lot of really good work around the built environment and equity and looking at, so they have a lot of data that they've been collecting that just helps supplement, maybe it's not the official, here's the DOT data, but it helps tell the story about your specific project, that maybe you're not in one of those historically disadvantaged census tracts, or, there's less of a direct connection. The more you can rely on those other data sets and build those partnerships to help provide that ahead of time is really helpful.
Yeah, and don't forget, I think they've redefined it slightly in this year as opposed to 2022. But so they have areas of persistent poverty, and then they have historically disadvantaged census tracts. And last year the HDCs were the priority, and Salisbury had a very small piece that was at HDC. But as I said earlier, the entire city was essentially an area of persistent poverty. In other words, it met 1 to 3 of the metrics. Whereas if it meets 4 or higher, it's an HDC. They've redefined that slightly this year from the way I'm reading it, so that you can count all of them, because that was a source of confusion for a lot of places last year. But they obviously they're not going to bar you just because you have a very small portion. We're an example of that. They just want to make sure you're not spending all the money in affluent areas for obvious reasons. And then as far as extra data, don't hesitate to reach out to your partners. So like SU, Salisbury University, which is our partner, they have a lot of student data and stuff from their university police department that isn't otherwise recorded. So they have like near misses and camera data and things that we were able to pull from as well, that they were able to produce that doesn't appear anywhere else. So don't forget to reach out to those partners if you got them.
Perfect. Thank you all. So that's all the time we have for questions. And to close us out, we at RTC are thrilled to spotlight a recent RTC initiative, the Trail Nation Collaborative, which is a learning community where advocates, public leaders, and professionals can come together to share their experiences, challenges, and strategies for accelerating the pace of connecting trails and active transportation infrastructure. If you're interested in learning more or joining the collaborative, links will be in the chat and in the follow-up email. So that's all the time we have for today. I want to thank our presenters, Betty, Aaron, and Will, for sharing today. And I want to thank all of you for joining us. Have a great day.